Marc Morial, national president of the Urban League and the former mayor of New Orleans, visited Springfield recently. We spent some time with Mr. Morial and with Henry Thomas, the Springfield chapter Urban League president. We had an extensive discussion about race in America today, but we began by looking at the Urban League's historic dedication to working to empower people through economic success.
We connect people to home ownership and to quality housing through home buyer education programs. We connect people to business expansion and opportunities through our entrepreneurship work, and we connect young people, and this is where so much of our passion is, to better educational opportunities that leads to jobs and careers. This is the work we do across the nation, and of course here in Springfield, under Henry's leadership, he's done it in a creative, innovative way.
Well, Henry, let me ask you about that, because you and I just had a minute to talk before we started the taping, and we're talking about your years chairing the Board of Trustees of the University of Massachusetts. You're still on the board, no longer chair, which means you actually get to sleep occasionally.
Right, I have a few extra hours.
In the last 10 or 12 years. You had 2 full-time jobs. But you said, you know, the cool thing for you was the 2 jobs were about the same thing.
Right. Well, if you define, I was fortunate enough to find myself in a volunteer role where I was leading one of the largest enterprises in the Commonwealth, the University of Massachusetts, a $10 billion enterprise. And sometimes you can get preoccupied with the complexities and the largeness of the institution. But if you focus on the work, I could define it in the same context of the work that I do with the Urban League. Uplift of people, individuals, developing capabilities so that one can be competitive in the job market, developing skills, developing economic self-sufficiency for individuals so that they can have a great life and have a realistic shot of living the American dream. So it has been a great opportunity for not just me, but for the Urban League, having this kind of connection.
Marc Morial, 2014 Urban League report, One Nation Underemployed. What a great title. Jobs Rebuild America. When times are tough for all, they're even worse for communities of color.
Yeah, they are. And the recession hit everybody. It impacted everybody. And I know it had an impact on Western Massachusetts. But its impact on communities of color is that it drove the unemployment rate up in many black and brown communities over 20%. And even now, even still, even into job creation and a period of quote unquote recovery, those high levels of unemployment still persist. It also cost many people their homes, but it disproportionately cost African Americans and Latinos their homes through foreclosures, through toxic mortgages, through high-priced mortgages. So we were so engaged in the recovery as what we like to call economic first responders, helping people stay on their feet. Now, we're trying to help people rebuild their balance sheets, rebuild their lives, achieve some semblance of economic self-sufficiency after the most difficult and demanding recession since the Great Depression.
Throughout the years, the Urban League, which has a great history going back 100 years now just about, but it's not been without controversy. I remember reading a biography of a great leader in the 1960s, Whitney Young. Some people in the civil rights movement called him Weighty Young. They said, you're too much behind the scenes, you're too much in the corporate boards, you're too much not on the front line demonstrating. And he was about finding jobs, making change in that sort of sub rosa background way.
After Martin Luther King, there are probably more scholarship programs, dinners, schools, and initiatives named after Whitney Young than any other personality or leader of that period. Whitney played a unique role. Now, what is important, and people have to remember that, he was side by side with Martin Luther King in 1963 in the March on Washington, side by side with Martin Luther King and Lyndon Johnson when both the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were in fact signed, side by side with Martin Luther King and Roy Wilkins in Selma, played this role which said, that business and corporate America had a stake in the success of civil rights and equal opportunity. And before there were diversity programs and inclusion programs, there was Whitney Young talking about it. Before businesses understood the spending power of the African American community, there was Whitney Young preaching it. I'd like to think that Whitney Young was before his time, and because he was before his time, some people misunderstood him.
It seems there's been a lot of pain, a lot of soul searching in this country over the question of race in recent months, because we seem to have seen an epidemic of white police officers shooting or otherwise mistreating black or Latino young men. Justice Department report out recently on Ferguson, Missouri found what they called a culture of racism there, where police systematically dealt differently, the records show, and more forcefully with people of color in that community. We've got a problem in this country, don't we?
We've got a problem, and while there's Ferguson, and people ask me, is Ferguson isolated? No, it is not, and here's why. There are more than 10 police departments in the country who are currently under, Henry, a federal consent decree, which means they've either admitted to a pattern and practice of constitutional violations, or a court has found. One or the other is how you get to a consent decree. And then there are a number of other cities for which there are current ongoing investigations. This is a problem, but this is a problem, I would say, that Washington certainly has a role. The president, the attorney general, they've done a good part of their job by shining a spotlight, by enforcing the civil rights laws. But I think this is mayors, local police chiefs, cities that have city managers, the city manager, the city council, local community activists. They've got to hold their police departments accountable. They've got to engage in the kind of soul searching, but also the kind of advocacy reform that's necessary. It is not necessary to have a safe city to have a brutal police department. And those that suggest that effective law enforcement requires these things, they are not only missing the mark, they're absolutely wrong.
The tragedy in all of this is that we as citizens, all citizens, white, black, brown, have been taught to respect, to embrace, and trust law enforcement. And when you have and because, oftentimes law enforcement is going to be between life and death situations. But to have law enforcement officials to abuse their power to the extent that it's obscene, that they're abusing their power and abusing that trust. I think that Mark is absolutely correct. Accountability has to be the name of the game, and the citizens, have the responsibility to bring on that accountability.
I would add this point, for those who may be watching, this is not an omnibus attack on law enforcement. There are most great, hardworking men and women who are public servants who serve in law enforcement. I learned when I was mayor of New Orleans that a small percentage of police officers were responsible for most of the complaints and most of the problems. But the problem with that is, it's the old adage, one bad apple can spoil the whole barrel. And when you have a culture that abounds, and that's what you saw in Ferguson, where it became the order of the day.